The Necessity, Christian education class, new membership study. The Necessity, from the book of Romans. The Godhead used the mind of one of the greatest ambassadors and penned a letter about the gospel of God. The book of Romans speaks of good news from God to fallen man. Verse 2 says in this way, it is a message that is not new and is not the clever invention of men, but a very ancient prophecy. It's reliable. And it is a prophecy of God. Verse 3, a message that is not centered on a system. It's not based on a government system, a military system, not even a religious system, but it is a message based on a living person. I said a living person who was born of the family of David, which is the evidence of his humanity, and who is eternal. And this was proven by his resurrection from the dead. And this person who is man and God is Jesus Christ. This ambassador name is Paul. And in his book, he introduces the righteousness of God, which he also had a testimony, sisters and brothers, which he was not ashamed. He was not embarrassed. He was not disappointed. So he wrote through this message, he found that his soul, his conscience, and his spirit experienced the grace and peace that is through the righteousness of God. This book of Romans simply reveals the work of God. Listen, listen, listen. That's why it's good news. That does not condemn the guilty. That does not condemn the guilty, but gives to the guilty the God kind of righteousness. This message from God does not prove the sinner was right. This righteousness of God does not make the sinner a good man. I got to say that one more time. Listen to me carefully. It does not prove the sinner was right. It does not make the sinner a good man. This righteousness of God that was revealed through the book of Romans means God treats the sinner who believes in the gospel of Jesus Christ as if he had not been a sinner at all. I told you, this is a book of good news, class. For the righteousness of God is necessary and is given based on trust. God rather give justification. God rather give justification than to give wrath. Good news. God rather give what we can never earn than to give what we deserve. So Apostle Paul was a man, according to Romans, the first chapter, was separated to study, to open up his mind that it may be downloaded, that the revelation of God's grace and love and mercy can be downloaded into his heart so that he may be able to share the great work of love. And in this he shared how God, listen to this one, how God had to persuade the human race of its guilt and to convince them of their need of his righteousness. The human race is ungodly and unrighteous. Ungodly means they sin against God. Unrighteousness means man sins against man. Paul's studies reveal that God, through his great love, was successful. God reached the mind. God reached the conscience of men. And he done it through creation. The human race at that particular time of God's study and of God's persuasion was without excuse. Listen to this. The problem was not that they did not know God. Read first chapter of the book of Romans. The problem was not that they did not know God, because God was successful in making himself known. But this is the problem. But that they refuse to glorify him as God. The human race thought, the human race disregarded, the human race intentionally hid themselves from God. The study of this great ambassador shows there was a tragic result of the human race refusing God. In his righteous judgment, he gave men up to their heart's desire, allowing them to experience the result of their wrong decision. In their wrong decision, they created the immoral man or the immoral person. In their wrong decision, they created the moral person. In their wrong decision, they created the religious person. In their wrong decision, they created the skeptic, the doubter. darkness. Look at this. But God does not overlook sin. His wrath is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold down the truth by their ungodly living. Since what may be known about God is plain. I'm reading the scriptures now. Because God has made it plain to them ever since the creation of the world. His invisible qualities, his eternal power, his divine nature have been clearly seen. They are understood in the things that God has made, so that people have no excuse. Yes, they knew God, but they refused to worship him or give thanks to him. Listen to what Paul's study found out. They became vain, because you know, man, he gonna blame God for everything. They became vain in their imaginations, and their hearts were darkened. They said they were wise. Instead, they became foolish and changed the glory of God, changed the revelation of God, changed what God had revealed into the image of birds, into the image of creatures, things that God created. So, instead of wiping them out with the flood or with fire, God gave them what they desired. He surrendered them to the power of sin. You will not allow me to teach you by law. You will not allow me to teach you by revelation that you got a sin problem. I'm going to let sin teach you. Y'all don't hear what I'm saying. I'm going to let sin teach you. For this reason, sin led them to exchange the natural relationships for that which is unnatural. Sin, they did not see fit to have God in their knowledge. So God gave them to do things not proper. Became people, being filled with unrighteousness, being filled with greed, doing the act of murdering, being backbiters, being proud. And not only that, but inventors. Sin created them to be inventors of more evil things. Became disobedient to parents. Became God haters. Became unloving. Became unforgiving. Became unmerciful. They knew, even though sin created this, the light of God's revelation was not put out by the darkness. Y'all don't hear me today. They knew the judgment of God. This is what Paul learned. Yet they continued. They continued. That's why Paul can put so much weight on it. By grace. They approved and tolerated others who practice. All this you can find in Romans, the 1st chapter, the 20th through the 32nd verse. Paul in his prayer room in a jailhouse cell received what God went through with one civilized world called man, between the time of Nimrod and between the time of King Nebuchadnezzar. God had put man through this test so that he may know the result of sin. But listen to this. But the gospel of God, the book of Romans, almost got happened. The book of Romans, which is the gospel of God, proved that even though the pit they were in, they digged it. Even though God, through law, God through conscience, law in the conscience, law on Moses' table, even though God through creation, through the sea, through the stars, through the moon, through animals, even in their own body, had revealed to them that he is God and that he is their Savior. And then when they received, they got an A in the class. They received the revelation. I said they got an A in the class, but they didn't want to keep it. They denied it. They refused it. They turned down the Christian diploma. And instead of leaving them in that pit of sin, the book of Romans proved that God could not leave them like this. His love for them, as the song said, went way down and picked them up. And so Paul, as I come to the close of this, Paul said, I'm going to just give you one little verse. Romans 1, first chapter and the 15th verse. This is why I am so eager to preach the gospel. This is why I am so eager to reveal to you that there is a righteousness from God. There is salvation from the God in whom we have offended. This is why I am so eager to preach the gospel. Also to you who are in Rome. Also to you who are in Egypt. Also to you who are in Israel. Whatever civilization you're in, the gospel is ready to declare salvation. Our next class, we will be studying what was revealed in the book of Romans, the first chapter, the 18th through the 32nd verse. In the book of Romans, the second chapter, the first and the 10th verse. We will be studying the immoral person and the moral person. The immoral and the moral person. And the conclusion is, you need the righteousness of God. Ain't God a good God? Yes, he is.